a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. First up, I think I should apologize. Some of the sections tonight are going to have my voice a little bit croakier than normal, as you may notice now. I recorded this piecemeal over the last few days, and tonight is my last chance to record to get an episode up in time. So, intro and outro are going to be Dave a little bit extra croaky tonight. If it's a bother, skip straight to the story. I won't hold it against you. So sorry about that, and thank you very much. Now back to the usual part of the story. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Do you find your mind spinning and churning? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns, but slowly letting go and drifting into the deep night. So before we carry on, if you wouldn't mind just giving a little bit of a listen, I want to make an appeal specifically to people who've been listening for a while, to, if you're finding that the show is helpful and you've been with me for a while and you're listening to a couple of episodes a week or a couple of episodes a night, if I'm helping you get some sleep or someone you care about to get some sleep, and if you have the means, and this is very important, if you have the means to provide some support, please help me keep the show going and help me to grow it by supporting me on the Patreon. You can find it at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. I've got a few people backing me at the moment at $5 a month, and I appreciate all of you very, very much. I want to do a little bit of an upgrade on some of my equipment. I want to buy myself and all of us who are listening here as well a little bit of a Christmas present. I want to get some equipment so I can do a little bit of a sound quality upgrade so that those of you who've been patient enough to stick with me for this long can hear what it will sound like with equipment especially for the purpose. And hopefully people who come across it may even be even more inclined to stick around. And also, I'm very close to be covering all my basic monthly costs. I would like to upgrade a few of my services. And in the long run, I really would like to do this full time. If I could do it without having to worry about doing another job, I would be able to do more episodes, and I would have time to put a little bit more work into the creative side. I think people enjoy what I do overall, but I think I could do a little bit more. I want to say that if you have any means at all, even $1 really does help. And if you get $1, there you get a benefit out of it. I release the Catnap episodes, which I release on Radio Public, free to listen to, but you have to listen on their app and listen to their ads. So if you want to avoid that, if you're interested in listening to the shows but you don't want to listen to advertising, a mere $1 a month gets you access to all the Catnap episodes, and I give you a shout out on an episode, as well as a listing on the website in the thank you section. If you sign up for $5 a month, the price of I don't even know, I think it's the price of a cup of coffee in the US, I'm not too sure. $5 is a few cups of coffee at a coffee shop here. That gets you all of those benefits, plus you get promo-free and story-only edits of every episode. And as a bonus to new $5 patrons, I'm going to be sending everybody handwritten postcards. I'm busy shopping at the moment, so those of you that are still waiting, I haven't forgotten. They will be coming soon. I'm going to pick some up next week and send those off. I'm going to run the postcard thing up till the end of November, so if you would like to get a little touristy postcard in the mail, as well as support the show, then please feel free. And I'm also trying to get something else interesting, fun going. If I reach $50 a month by the end of November, I'm going to do a bonus video episode. The video will be shared with all patrons, and I will do the audio section to release that as a bonus episode outside of my normal rotation, probably in January. I want to thank my newest $5 patron, Ali Fuller, who signed up this week. thank you very much. She's one of those who feels like the show has been a help to her. And yeah, like I say, at $5 you are being a major supporter. So if anybody else would like to join Ali and Megan and Win, who are my current $5 backers, then that would be fantastic. Please feel free. So again, hit that up, patreon.com/sleepytimetales. The link will be in the show notes. And come along and join up and help me to keep the show going and help me to grow it as much as I can. If, however, you are enjoying the show and you would like to provide some support, but you don't have any extra money every month, and believe me, in this year of 2019, not many of us do have money lying around, there are a couple of ways you can help out. I have an Audible trial program up and running. So if you sign up at audibletrial.com/sleepytime, you will get a free ebook to keep, as well as a 30-day free trial of the Audible service, as well as giving me a nice little kickback that will help greatly to keep things up and running. Also, as I mentioned, the Catnap episodes go up on Radio Public, along with all the regular episodes, obviously. If you want to burn through them all at once, there are, as you're listening to this, there should be 12 episodes. So you can just queue those up and give them a quick spin one night if you're so inclined. And then, lastly, I just want to shout out the music which I play. It's a very popular part of the show. The music is Undesire by Kumiko. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive. I've got their website and their Patreon linked in the show notes, as there's some very cool stuff that they have in various styles, mostly sort of electronic, but a lot of very chilled stuff that they release. They actually work under various different names, different styles, and different band names, essentially, that I recommend are very much worth checking out. And thank you, and back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepytime Tales, and what is a sleep podcast? To answer your question, let me start with a common problem. Do you find that you lie awake at night with your mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with the anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to talk you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, I always struggled to sleep. It was only fairly recently, actually, in the last couple of years, that I discovered that droning male voices have a tendency to be almost like a sedative for me. I used to find myself falling asleep in the middle of podcasts that I was listening to at night, and eventually I started listening to shows specifically for the purpose of falling asleep. Very recently, I actually discovered that there are such a thing as sleep podcasts that are specially designed and intended for the listener to essentially bore you to sleep. There was one that I tried out that worked quite well for me, but when I recommended it to other people, not everybody liked the narrator's voice, so I hadn't found anything else quite like it at the time, and I've got a boring, drony voice. I thought to myself, let me give it a go and see how it goes. Again, tonight I'm a little bit beyond drony and more into croaky territory, so sorry about that. If you've stuck with this far, well done, thank you. So yeah, this is now my 32nd episode. Next week I start out the second season of Sleepytime Tales, and so far so good. Every episode starts with this long intro. While it's the one thing that I've had negative feedback about of the show, but it really is there for a reason. The main reason being that to new listeners, well, there's two reasons, both very important. Firstly, I need to explain what this show is to new listeners. Not everybody who comes to a sleep podcast for the first time might know exactly what it's for, and so I'll just explain to you folks that the whole point here is for me to help you in my way to get a good night's sleep. All the listeners, for them, this is a chance to follow on with the sort of creating a new habit to sleep. insomnia in a lot of ways is a habit that we develop, and developing the habit of going to sleep is a tricky thing. So you might need rituals or things that you do over and over. So for people who've been around for a while, this is a chance to make sure your room's the right temperature, get the lights out, hope you brushed your teeth, had a little bit of water, and start the process of settling in. Now, for you newer listeners, let me just explain what this is for. The idea is that you listen to there's two ideas behind listening to this show. The first one is how I generally engage with sleep podcasts. So for me, what I do generally is, this reason I struggle to sleep is my mind spins around and round in circles, and I stress over various things. Like I stress over being at work tomorrow with a voice that sounds like this, but that doesn't help. So what I need to do is I need to distract my mind by listening to something just interesting enough to keep my attention, but not so interesting enough that I just can't even bear to fall asleep and miss out on anything. The other way that you might want to engage with it, if you have a slightly different type of insomnia, is just turn the volume down and let my voice drone in the background until it eventually wafts you to sleep, like some people like wind in the trees or the ocean in the background. Whatever works for you is a perfectly valid way to engage with it. If you engage in a different way, I would actually really like to know, because maybe I could recommend it to somebody else. So pop me a mail if you do, or hit me up on social media. Tonight's story is a revisit of the Rivers to the Stars series that I just finished up a couple of weeks ago. The story of the human race exploring our nearest, or going to our nearest star neighbor, Proxima Centauri, and what happens on the way there, and a little bit of what happens after arriving. I talk a little bit about the concepts of stuff and waffle about a little bit of nonsense, but if you've been here for 32 episodes so far, you probably used to me waffling about a bit of nonsense. Well, you've never heard it, and it's because it's so effective you're asleep before I get to any of that. What is important, though, is however you engage with the show and whatever the story is about, you don't try to force it. Sleep can't be forced. What you need to do, what works best, in my opinion, is to just keep a light mental grip on my voice and on the story, just to stop your mind from spinning and allow sleep to creep up on you as your mind is focused on one thing. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's very important that you don't feel pressurized. It may not work on the first night. It might take a few nights for you to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange to you. Maybe my really croaky voice is a bit odd. Sorry, it's not normally quite this bad. Maybe one episode just isn't long enough. Whatever you do, give it 2 or 3 days if this is your first time, just to sort of get a sense of if it is going to help you. The most important thing, though, is that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may take a while to work for you. So queue up a few episodes or just run through the backlog. What I do with sleep podcasts is I generally just let them stream all night. I lie in the dark with my earbuds in and my phone in my pajama pocket, and I just let it run. Sometimes when I wake up at 3 a.m., it's still running, and I just let the voices waft me back to sleep. One of my very favorite things is sometimes I wake up about 30 minutes before my alarm goes. Usually I carry on listening and I just fall straight back asleep again. Let me tell you now that 30 minutes is sometimes the most restful part of my night. There is something about allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm that's just deeply, deeply satisfying. And so you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who's elected to lie in the dark listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to do a small part to help you laugh, make things easier for you. Lack of sleep is an epidemic at the moment, and anything that helps us get a good night's sleep is definitely for our own good. So I'm here to help you to face tomorrow well rested and better able to cope and process. Now, I feel very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. I need you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. The intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift in the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you and under you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and we'll try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it is not your enemy. It is a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life, and the supposed progress that shines bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Rivers to the Stars, a retrospective. I'm one of those people. I've wanted to be an author basically ever since I can remember. When I was much younger, it was quite a keen desire, and as I grew older, it kind of faded away as it started to sink in that, number one, it takes a lot of time, and number two, even if you do manage to write something, the odds are pretty slim of it ever going anywhere. So I put away the thoughts of becoming an author in the same place I put the thought of becoming a rock star. Except I did put a little bit more work into the rock star idea. I did learn to play guitar and a little bit of bass and whatnot. Played guitar for a few years before I eventually just faded away. Writing, I used to write quite a lot when I was in school, and I used to do very well with essays and fiction writing, but I never really stuck with it consistently. But I was always someone with a pretty wild imagination and a fondness for sci-fi and fantasy that often gave me these boiling ideas of stories that I would love to tell, to try reach people. As I've gotten older, I've developed a fondness for slightly more grounded science fiction stuff that's it's definitely sci-fi, but it's not space opera or anything like that. I like stuff that are even if it's not based in reality or realistic, something with a sort of internal consistency that's at least nods towards possibility and reality. So when the time came for me to try come up with a couple of storylines for my strange sleep aid podcast that I was coming up with, one idea was a very grounded science fiction story that has been bubbling vaguely in the back of my head for the last, I don't even know, probably 5 or more years. As much as science fiction where people zip through the stars faster, thousands of times faster than the speed of light, as much as those are enjoyable stories, I've started to come to the theory that we're never ever going to travel faster than the speed of light. So when the time came for me to try write a science fiction story that I believed in, I felt the need to rather have it based on something other than warp drives or wormholes of ways to spread through the stars faster than will probably ever be possible. There are some science fiction stories out there, and universes where constant acceleration is something that happens fairly often. The idea that an engine with enough fuel could just drive a ship under power long enough that it could get to where it's going at something close to the speed of light. So while it's generally agreed that the amount of energy something would need to produce is basically as impossible as traveling faster than the speed of light, it still had a little bit of a basis in something vaguely realistic that I could come to grips with for my story. Because again, the whole point of the Sleepytime Tales is interesting stories told in uninteresting ways. So the idea that we'd have this fantastical technology that I could talk about that would sound so boring and so mundane that people wouldn't even really think about it or engage with it too seriously. So it hits on the idea of the Abara drives. I don't know if it's a completely unique idea that I've come up with for these things. Maybe it's something that I've heard or read somewhere else. But the idea of essentially just tying asteroids together and shooting them into space as a accessible form of interstellar transport, just on a lot of levels, it makes a lot of sense to me. Building fantastical spaceships and going faster than light is difficult and expensive, and while I'm sure hollowing out a couple of asteroids isn't easy or cheap, it would probably be more accessible, especially if you're trying to move hundreds of thousands of people. If you just hollow out a section in an asteroid, I say just, obviously it'll be a lot more complicated than just getting a melon baller and scooping it. But it just seemed like a realistic proposition as a method of traveling through space. So I slowly picked away at the idea, the specifics and relative specifics of the drives. I'm no hard science fiction writer or science genius of any kind. I did physics and chemistry up to the end of high school, but that was pretty much where it runs out. I've read a few hard science fiction things and a few little books about space travel, the space itself. I'm not sure how actually best to express this, sort of the idea of sort of very lightweight things about quantum mechanics and stuff like that. But really, most of it just goes straight one ear and out the other, or straight in one eye and out the other. I mean, I am reading. Okay, no, this is completely breaking down. Okay, never mind that. So anyway, I'm no scientist turned author or author of any kind or scientist of any kind. I just thought that possibly an efficient kind of drive would be a black hole in an asteroid made of ice. Even after I came up with the idea, I sort of realized later on that in the asteroid belt there were very few asteroids made of ice. Although there are enough there that it would still probably be usable for my purposes. One of the other things that's been inspirational for me in the last few years is the TV show The Expanse. Based on a book series. I haven't read any of the books, but the TV show, especially the first 2 seasons, is quite enjoyable because it's mostly fairly grounded. While the ships are ugly things designed to travel between the planets, there's very little grace or beauty to them, the ships in that, and most of the ships at least in that show. I would go even slightly a step further with mine to make them not just boring looking ships, but not even like spaceships at all, just these junk piles, essentially self-propelled piles of garbage. Or at least that's what they would look like to anybody with even a little bit of poetry in their soul when it comes to machines or anything like that. And I also put together, sort of slowly outlined the idea of what the expedition would be like. You wouldn't send one ship out into a neighboring star. Although odds are very slim anything would go wrong in terms of accidents or anything like that. Well, in terms of like driving into something, the odds of the great science fiction terror of bumping into an asteroid is astronomically tiny. Things could go wrong on the ships though. They could get diseases, or something could break or fail and people would end up all vented into space. But I like the idea that because the ships were in a lot of ways so simple that they were almost impossible to break, and it was only one of the 50 ships had the very unlikely event happen of a collision. So that gave a little bit of action in my first episode, which was the one about all the ships leaving our solar system to go to Proxima Centauri. Also, given current political and sort of social climate of the world today, I was trying to imagine what the society would look like that these ships would come from. When I started working on the story, it was looking like, in a lot of ways, almost the end of Western civilization. We have the United States falling to fascism. We got the United Kingdom deciding just randomly as a joke that it was going to leave the European Union. And society seems, in a lot of ways, on the verge of a breakdown. And of course, global warming's coming, climate change is coming, and it's going to have huge catastrophic impacts on the world. So I sort of had this idea of what a future world would look like with the United States and the United Kingdom as two of the major superpowers withdrawing from global relevance, and other powers growing into their places. And obviously I live in South Africa. I'm from Africa. I'm a very it's a funny thing to say, to be an African when you're a white person. It's a very fraught statement to make because, well, we don't have a great history on this continent, particularly in South Africa. So as much as we may feel it's true, it's a difficult thing to explain to people that my family may have come from another continent entirely, but this is where I am and where I belong, and my roots here are very deep. My grandfather came from Portugal, and the rest of my family has been in this country for generations. Even despite the history, we've always been felt very connected to our home. So the idea to me that Africa would grow out of a world where the United States and the United Kingdom have withdrawn, basically hiding. Obviously the great superpowers of the East would come in to sort of take their places, but with the climate change, things would be thrown out of balance. And so the idea being that the people of Africa were the ones to actually leave Earth and go live in the asteroid belts, rather than, well, obviously a lot of people wouldn't leave, but they would be the spear tip of our expansion, because ultimately it's as much as it would be dangerous to leave, it's dangerous to stay, and people with not the best choices would maybe make the hardest ones. And so this was basically the background of my whole story, the idea that people from Africa, from all walks of life, and probably welcoming of people from all over the world would spread into the solar system, much like the belters in the Expanse books and in a lot of other science fiction. The whole idea of a sort of working class working in the asteroid belts, providing resources for the Earth and any other planets. But I also saw it as something slightly different, because the giant expanse of the asteroid belt would actually, like, and usually in shows like science fiction like The Expanse, the Earth is wealthy and it's exploiting the asteroid belt. I would see sort of not the opposite happen here, but something very different, because all the wealth is in the asteroid belt, and the Earth would basically need to play nice to be able to survive, and it's under-resourced state. So the idea is that the people of the asteroid belt are not the sort of working class belters like you get in The Expanse and other shows. They're actually, while they may be working class and working people, they are the economic powerhouse of the solar system. So when the time comes to leave the solar system, they would be the first ones to do that as well, because they'd have the resources to use. And I think that's enough waffling about the sort of basic idea of or the formation of the idea of these Rivers to the Stars stories. I mean, I didn't even hit on the name of Rivers to the Stars until after I think it was actually only after the second episode when I realized, oh wait, all my ships are called Rivers. Let me retroactively claim that I was cleverer than I thought and use this as my basic story, or the sort of overarching name for the basic story. So the 50 ships of the Rivers fleet all departed over a period of a few months, heading towards Proxima Centauri. Now, interestingly enough, I hit on Proxima Centauri as the location to, or the destination rather, because it's the closest star to ours. Although I didn't realize at the time it's probably a garbage place to go to. It's a red dwarf with very little heat, and possibly as part of a trinary system with Alpha Centauri A and B. To be honest, I kind of thought Proxima Centauri was one of the Alpha Centauris. I didn't realize it was a separate star. This is why you do your research, kids. But retroactively came up with an explanation for that later on. But as I explained it later, that the reason the fleet headed for Proxima Centauri was because it was less likely to find any other life or anything of the sort there. Real life, possibly even sentient life, would be far more likely to be found on the brighter, more sun-like stars of Alpha Centauri A and B than the red dwarf of Proxima Centauri. So it worked out for me in my own sort of anti-colonial way that Proxima Centauri probably would be the better destination. So the ships departed, and I found some handy tools that I'm going to have linked in the show notes that I have been linking to help me sort of calculate the time and distance that things would take. Near-relativistic celestial mechanics are quite a complicated thing, and luckily there's very smart people out there who would take the time to sit and do websites that run the maths for you. I worked out how long the trips would take with speed, that they would get to 0.9 something of the speed of light, the time it would take to accelerate, the time it would take to decelerate, how much longer it would be outside the ship than inside the ships, because one of the interesting things about travel close to the speed of light is that time sort of distorts. Something on a ship traveling close to the speed of light would perceive time as going slower than something on the outside. So if on Earth people are watching the ships fly to another star, it would seem to them to be about 5 years, whereas on the ship itself it would be under 4. So there's some very interesting weirdness about space travel that makes for potentially interesting storytelling and potentially complicated exploration as we possibly one day do expand out into the galaxy. So I worked out the time intervals for traveling through our solar system. Speaking of online tools, I used an online science fiction name generator to generate the names for the characters of the story. The characters being called Raydn Camran, the pilot, a woman, Patrick Elix, the co-pilot, a man, and Corey Darren, a non-binary flight engineer. I kind of regretted as I went along the decision to generate these very sci-fi weird names. I think it would actually be more interesting to keep the names more grounded and with a sense of where the people come from. Although it's 350 years or 340 years in the future, so maybe names would be quite a little bit unusual. So I worked out quite carefully how long it would take to pass the various landmarks in our solar system, how long it would take to reach the edge of the solar system at all, actually. The second episode was when the ships left our solar system completely. That was the interplanetary episode. As the ships went into the Oort cloud, And man, I don't even know how I got a whole episode out of that. I mean, really, like, I mean, I know the point of these stories is to bore people to sleep, but wow, I mean, well done to anyone who's stuck with me through these things. I waffled on for quite a bit, as I recall, about the distances between comets and all sorts of stuff. Actually, what's in my notes for this? I spoke about various other things. The one thing that I did was quite interesting as I looked at it was how I ran another tool that showed the actual celestial mechanics and how the travel path of the fleet would go through the orbit of Eris, although at that particular time it would be very, very far away. I talked mostly about how big space is. The old Douglas Adams thing about space is really big, like really, really big. Talked about different crews, maintenance crews, technicians, astronomers, scientists. Talked sort of about the more I don't like phrases like menial work, because even physical work takes a lot of skill. I talked about the processed lab-grown synthesized meat, which I decided to nickname Bumbulu, thanks to was a word which means of Imbumbulu, which means fake. Okay, so minor peek behind the curtain moment here. I normally do the recording of the story all in one fell swoop. Most nights I try to do the intro and outro and promo section at the same time, but last night when I was talking about Mbumbulu, my daughter got up to because my voice was bothering her, so I've had to take a 1-day break, and it's been a bit of a torrid day. Woke up this morning with my internet not working, so hopefully I get this episode uploaded in time. We'll see how that goes, but we've got to continue nonetheless. So anyway, I was talking about the artificial meat which the people call Mbumbulu, after the Xhosa word Imbumbulu, meaning fake. And I also talked about how I don't like to use the term menial for people doing generally labor that's in this day and age looked on as unskilled. Unskilled, air quotes, labor still takes a lot of very real work, and modern culture doesn't really respect that as much as it should. The whole thing also with generally speaking, robots and most cleaning and maintenance tasks are undertaken by robots. Some work, though, is easier done by people, and there's a general philosophy in the Afropolitan fleet that a little bit of basic, again, air quotes, hard work and getting your hands dirty is good for bonding, especially for people to do it together. So even engineers and astronauts sometimes take turns doing janitorial work and maintenance work. And those who can cook the food, a lot of stuff is processed out of the hydrocarbons in the ice asteroid that is part of the engine of the ship. And basically, there's plenty to eat, even if those sometimes not all that. The basics are not all that interesting. The Bumbulu artificial meat, probably very similar to the Impossible stuff that you get today, the sort of Burger King style stuff, which I haven't had a chance to try yet, although I'm fascinated by the idea. I did go through a vegetarian stage where I ate fake hamburgers and stuff like that, and while I did kind of enjoy them, it wasn't close enough to a meat substitute that just made you miss it more than anything else. But that's basically the tale of how the humans and what they were doing while they left the solar system. Most people were in the cold sleep. The flight crews that were active for the launch section were already back in cold sleep, and maintenance crews and maintenance flight crews were operating the process. The next episode was the section where talking about the deceleration of the ships. Now, the ships basically are just, in a lot of ways, very fancy and high tech, but essentially just giant dumb rockets. They fire and their engines can only run in one direction. When the time comes to decelerate, the whole ship is turned around, or rather the whole ship is turned around. Engines are cut off, it's turned around, and deceleration starts. I sort of speculate that after 20 months of constant acceleration getting close to the speed of light, the front of the ship would probably show some signs of wear and tear, even though it wouldn't be hitting asteroids regularly, if ever. Even the vacuum of space hitting the odd hydrogen atom at the kinds of speeds it does would still probably cause weathering on the front of the ship. I'm not entirely sure how I got a whole episode out of this, to be honest. It was a very short little bit of notes that I made. I think recapping most of the story at the beginning of every one really helps. There is talk here of about a fairly large, significant-sized engineering and tech crew, about 100 people, begin the process of moving everything and getting the deceleration going. And that was pretty much the whole of that episode. Just looking at it now, like, geez, really didn't go into very much. At this point, I was actually starting to struggle to put together a concept of what I was actually going to do, because I was trying to stretch the story out, but then I was sort of going like, okay, now I need to try get to a few more episodes here. What am I actually going to do to extend this into something substantial, but keep it interesting, but again, not too interesting, which is the whole central premise of Sleepytime Tales. So I decided that one of the things engineers and astronomers, and I guess maybe some astronauts, although I tried not to say that in the first place, would be to use the objects that they have access to provide some amusement. At first I thought of sort of robot battling, sort of in the style of Big Hero 6, or robot battles like occasionally do the rounds in our culture today. But then I thought potentially exploding robots and that on a spaceship probably wouldn't be the best of ideas. So I decided to go for a race, a series of races, and I covered one race specifically, between one that was a lot like a fancy large Roomba and another one that was a loading robot that I envisioned sort of almost like a four-legged automated forklift in a way. Something that would walk under its own power and have a very different movement style to the more Roomba-style cleaning robots. And I also thought to myself, what sort of challenges could I set? Because, yeah, sort of how would the people who did the races account for different types of robots, how they would move, that wouldn't completely stop the other robots dead, but would allow them the possibility of carrying on, but still potentially end their operation. So I included obstacle courses and going out into the vacuum of space to try to deal with dissipating heat, because that is something that's a tricky situation for spacecraft even today. Dissipating heat is a very tricky thing because there's no convection from air on the outside of a spacecraft, obviously. So I did what I thought was a very exciting, air quotes, because it probably wasn't very exciting to listen to, a race between these two little robots. Well, one fairly small, one fairly large. And just dragged the whole thing out a bit to get to a decent length, and gave it a little bit of drama. Couldn't tell which one was going to win towards the end. I sort of built up the Roomba style one as the more hero show. The robot called Dust Bunny, as opposed to the Big Betty, which was the loading robot. Actually, looking at my notes here, I didn't make a note of which one won. If I recall correctly, it was Big Betty, the loading robot, though. Although I made it look like it was a narrow victory, and it nearly went the other way. But as I recall correctly, Dust Bunny, the vacuum cleaner, took a lot of damage in space, not being able to dissipate its heat. Also at the stage when I was naming characters, I was using generators to generate actual, human names. I quite like some of these names. Asgrimir Eliasson, Muzafer Miltsikov, and Nisizwa Mbizo. Always make sure I got at least one or two African names, with it being an African journey, obviously. Then as I got to episode 5, I had reached the decision that I was going to go to episode 6 of both my stories that I was running, as well as all the other extra bits and pieces around them. So now I had to come up with a way to make the arrival to the Proxima Centauri something interesting and enough to fill out 2 episodes. So I decided to do the arrival as one thing and a little bit of exploration as the 6th episode. I went into a bit of detail. Also came up with something I came up with in the course of writing the 5th and 6th episodes was ideas of scout ships that had been sent ahead, which if I planned that out a little bit better, I probably would have mentioned I would have thought of and mentioned in earlier episodes, as well as communication relays that they were establishing in between the stars of Sol and Proxima Centauri. The scouts had not observed any life in Proxima Centauri, so all of the ships arrived and they started to spread out to take over, except for 10 of the ships, which would be refit for traveling to Alpha Centauri A and B, while the remaining 40 spread across the Proxima system to provide support and center points for communities for the people who are going to stay behind. The river ships would essentially be like hospitals, food silos, and various places for people to collect, while the more nomadic populations established themselves out in the asteroids of the Proxima Centauri system. And I managed to milk that quite nicely for a full episode somehow, when I ended it and I moved on to the final episode, which was the 6th episode of the Rivers to the Stars series, episode 28 of the show itself. Basically, Raydn Camran, the pilot from the first episode, was going to Alpha Centauri B with the Starship Zambesi. So she had a bit of a farewell with her flight crew that she'd spent some time. By this point, I was starting to get an actual feel for the personalities of the characters. Raydn being the daring pilot, Patrick and Alex being just brave people, but they traveled to the stars, but more inclined to help establish the communities in Proxima. Now, Raydn Camran went out with another co-pilot once she was at Alpha Centauri B, doing some exploring around various asteroids, and suddenly things got a little bit interesting, because as they were exploring, she and a co-pilot saw something out in the asteroid belts, which came and got closer to them, and they saw another ship, a starship which was nothing like anything that they were familiar with, and they realized that they were surrounded. And that was where I ended a nasty cliffhanger, which you will probably pick up in about 6 months or so. So we will see that then. And so thank you for sticking around for this probably not very exciting retelling of a not very exciting original telling of a story I was making up specifically for the purpose of it not being particularly exciting. So thank you for your patience. The next season starts up next week as I release this, hopefully. I'm having a little bit of internet trouble. I'm really hoping I get this uploaded okay. We'll see you then. So thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales podcast, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe on whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Undizer Bakumiku. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.